So I'm a teacher, and an often overlooked and underdiscussed part of my job is understanding the stories that my students have about themselves and their own learning, and then helping them orient that story in a productive direction, one that hopefully leads to creativity and service to a community. One of the most difficult aspects of this part of the job is when a student has a reputation that they've either accepted about themselves or that they're trying to outgrow. Once a reputation exists, good or bad, it's very difficult to move on from. In the Act 1 video about Othello, I discussed how each character in the play tries to craft their own reputation through the performance and the production of stories, but how that reputation is also the product of the stories told by others. In Act 1, we saw Othello successfully craft his own identity by overcoming the biases and stories others tried to pin on him. In this video, we're going to focus more directly on the reputations themselves. In Act 2, we will see how Iago builds a reputation for himself as the arbiter of truth, how Cassio links the loss of reputation with damnation, how someone's reputation for goodness could be used against them, and how the acquisition of titles or status symbols can be used in the formation of a reputation. This video is part of a series of videos about Othello. If this sounds like it's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to be notified about future videos. And with that out of the way, let's go through Act 2 of Othello play by play. So Act 2 begins by immediately diffusing a lot of the urgency that we had in Act 1. In Act 1, Scene 3, people were constantly coming in and out of the scene, providing news of a Turkish fleet, and it seemed to be setting up some sort of military drama like Julius Caesar or Henry V. But then, at the start of Act 2, the threat in Cyprus is removed right away. That entire plotline, all that tension that we built up in the previous act, it disappears in just a few lines. The Turkish fleet has been destroyed by a storm before Othello even arrives in Cyprus. The potential for a military drama is over, and the potential for a domestic drama begins. Othello will not be able to play the part of the brave military commander now. He has a reputation for leading people into battle. Everybody trusts him to play that role perfectly. But that role isn't available anymore. We're not casting for that. He'll have to play the part of a husband instead, and nobody knows what kind of husband he'll be. I guess we're going to find out. Because of the chaos created by the storm, everybody arrives on Cyprus before Othello. Michael Cassio arrives first, followed by Iago, Emilia, and Desdemona. And when Cassio kisses the hand of Emilia, Iago's wife, he qualifies it by saying, "Let it not gall your patience, good Iago, that I extend my manners. 'Tis my breeding that gives me this bold show of courtesy." And this is a reference to the fact that Michael Cassio is a Florentine, not a Venetian. He has different customs, and in the logic of this play and this time period, being Florentine comes with a reputation for bold displays of affection. According to his cultural norms, he's being courteous, but he recognizes that according to the norms of the Venetians, like Iago, he might be viewed as flirtatious. Throughout the play, it's important to remember that Cassio is a big flirt. Iago will leverage this reputation and guide the way that other characters read that reputation. Iago's reply to Cassio's explanation is a quip about how Emilia talks too much. It's the first of many times Iago will insult his wife to her face. Interestingly, though, Desdemona quickly steps in to defend Emilia. Emilia has actually not even said a word so far. This initiates a banter between Iago and Desdemona, filled with Iago making big misogynistic claims about women in general, and Desdemona straight up asking him if he has the guts to apply that same critical lens to her. She's bold in this confrontation with Iago, and in doing so asserts herself as somebody willing to stand up and protect others. She has a reputation for being the fair, innocent, sheltered daughter, but she's clearly playing against her type here. She's willing to protect the vulnerable. She's willing to be a fighter. But before Iago can respond to her, she turns to the audience in a very quick aside and says, "I am not merry, but I do beguile the thing I am by seeming otherwise." In other words, she's nervous about what Iago will say about her, but she won't show it. It's an innocent comment, but it's also really similar to Iago's statement in Act 1, "I am not what I am." Even the good Desdemona has to perform from time to time, particularly in front of a critic like Iago. So Iago takes up the challenge. In doing so, he makes a few things clear. First, he is unambiguously misogynistic. The second, he's able to craft a little rhyme and a short narrative that will make anyone look bad. Desdemona pitches him different combinations of fair, black, wise, and foolish, and he establishes that he can fashion a malicious interpretation of any combination. In the first act, we see him try to craft a narrative around Othello's blackness through Brabantio, which ultimately fails to convince the Duke. Here, he's hinting that he can craft a story about Desdemona's fairness, her whiteness, that will ruin her reputation in the world. I think we can effectively call this foreshadowing. After this banter with Desdemona, Cassio takes Desdemona's hand, and Iago turns again towards us and says that he'll use something as small as this to take down Othello, confirming that he plans to use Cassio's reputation as a flirt and Desdemona's reputation for beauty against them both. When Othello arrives on Cyprus, the first thing that he says is to Desdemona. He says, "O my fair warrior," and if you remember, in Act 1, Othello says that Desdemona wished that heaven hath made her such a man as Othello, which could be understood in two ways. First, she wishes she could be as manly as Othello, and second, that she wishes that heaven made a man such as Othello to be her husband. By calling her a warrior here, Othello seems to hint at the first interpretation. She's a warrior herself, an adventurer. Additionally, her defense of Emilia a few lines earlier shows that she has a bit of the warrior in her. She's a protector. She is the fair warrior. It's in a small line like this, "O my fair warrior," that we can see her bond with Othello. She wants a life of adventure, and Othello can provide that. Othello wants to be valued in Venice for being more than a warrior, and she can provide that validation. He can provide her with adventure, and she can provide him with love, stability, and comfort. They work. At this point in the play, I kind of believe in their love. They talk as though no one else is around, and even Iago admits that their conversation is well-tuned. But as everybody else leaves the stage, Iago gets to work. His plan is to convince Othello that Desdemona is cheating on him with Cassio, but before he frames his narrative to Othello, he practices on Roderigo. He says of Desdemona that her eye must be fed. His argument is that since her husband isn't good to look at, she's hunting for something better, and Cassio fits it perfectly. Roderigo doesn't believe it. Because he's put Desdemona on a pedestal and thinks that she's some sort of goddess, he doesn't think she's capable of loving one man while she's married to another. Iago disabuses him of that logic promptly. The wine she drinks is made of grapes. If she had been blessed, she would never have loved the more. Roderigo has been fooled by a cultural expectation that a woman who is physically beautiful somehow inhabits a superhuman morality. Though she may have a reputation for virtue, Iago knows better. All humans are messy. No reputation accurately reflects the individual. Iago instructs Roderigo to pick a fight with Cassio when he gets a chance. If Roderigo can remove Cassio from the picture, then he'll have a better chance at stealing Desdemona from Othello. Roderigo agrees and leaves the stage. So Iago is alone on the stage once again, and once again he outlines his plan for Othello, making us complicit in his deception. We see him again search for a motive. He loves Desdemona, he thinks that Othello has slept with his wife, he wants to bring himself even with Othello, who has achieved all of the symbols and status and success that Venice has to offer. More motive hunting for the motiveless malignity. At the start of scene 3, Iago approaches Cassio right away to discuss Desdemona. It's another example, similar to most of Act 1, where characters shape Desdemona's reputation by talking about her rather than with her. The two bros sit and chat about her, and by doing so, they're participating in the construction of Desdemona's reputation, particularly when they talk about her eyes. Iago says, "What an eye she has, methinks it sounds a parley to provocation," to which Cassio responds, "An inviting eye, and yet methinks right modest." Everything Iago says in this section hints that Desdemona is full of lust, but Cassio interprets all of Iago's lines as reflecting virtues like hospitality or love. They're talking to each other, generally using the same words and talking about the same woman, but they see different characteristics. Iago is trying to make his interpretation of Desdemona's identity the default interpretation. He wants the world to see her in a particular way, as lustful. And this is not even the true interpretation that he has of her. He knows that he's outlining a fictional identity for Desdemona. He wants the world to see her not as he actually sees her, but as he wants the world to actually see her. Once again, Iago seems to be the only one truly aware of his role in the construction of the reputations of others. One of the major topics explored in this play is the inability to truly know anyone, and the different ways that Cassio and Iago see Desdemona and shape her reputation is part of that. And to add complexity to this, they're talking about the way that they see Desdemona through the way that Desdemona sees. They're talking about the way that she looks around the world. They're talking about how to interpret her inviting looks. They recognize her ability to confer value onto somebody just by giving that somebody her attention, her eye. Because Desdemona is viewed as a status symbol herself, she has the ability to change somebody else's reputation, like Othello's, simply through her gaze. And that's fascinating. Given the ways that Venice confers status onto individuals within the logic of this play, Desdemona's attention is the ultimate signifier of status. She is the daughter of a senator. She's beautiful and she's rich. To have Desdemona's attention is to win the game of status in Venice. Othello has bought into the cultural logic of Venice. He's an outsider who has stepped into the world of Venice, identified its values effectively, created a reputation for himself in alignment with those values, and then earned the symbols of prestige that this culture permits to those who exemplify those values. Desdemona, the rich white lady daughter of a senator, is proof of his success. She confers upon him institutional validation. She's a symbol for that validation. And you know what else is a symbol? A flag. Iago is Othello's ancient. That's the name of his position within the military. An ancient carries the flag, so he's in charge of the symbols that represent his community. And this is the perfect job for Iago because he is the ultimate manipulator of signs and signifiers. He invests people and objects with meaning and then controls their behavior by controlling the stories told about them. He recognizes Desdemona's value as a symbol and can manipulate the perception of that symbol for his own end. So as it turns out, Shakespeare's a really good storyteller, and he knows how to assign jobs to the characters in his plays in ways that maintain and contribute to the narrative cohesion of the overall story. Who would have guessed that? And this ability of Iago will become more apparent in Act 3 when he works wonders with the symbol of the handkerchief. But for now, it's interesting to note how he is able to have this control. The other characters build their identities by finding a role for themselves within the cultural logic of their place. Desdemona plays the role of the beautiful woman. Othello plays the role of the military hero. Cassio plays the role of the flirt. They link their identity to the established archetypes within the society. They are personally invested in the symbols that give them status and a role within the play's community. And this simply isn't true for Iago. He exists outside of the cultural logic that provides everybody else with meaning. He sees all of the symbols of status as simply that, just symbols that can be used or manipulated. And because he's not personally invested in the status symbols that everybody else uses, he's in a position to see through them and disrupt them. It's what makes him so dangerous, and perhaps that's why he keeps confiding in us, the audience. We also exist outside of the play, outside of Venice and the symbols that everybody else cares about. We're the only people who share his perspective. Anyway, shortly after Iago and Cassio talk about Desdemona's gaze, Iago convinces Cassio to have a drink, knowing that Cassio becomes drunk very quickly. Then, once he's drunk, Iago goes to work controlling the narrative of his drunkenness. He tells Montano that Cassio's drunkenness should be viewed as a reason to doubt Othello's judgment. When he does this, he's chipping away at Othello's reputation. He also tells Rodrigo that it's time to pick a fight, which he does. Montano attempts to break them up, and for that offense, Cassio stabs him. The noise from this brawl brings Othello to the party as he needs to play the judge in a situation that he did not witness. Othello's position as general means that he must decide on the consequences his men deserve. But again, he didn't see it. Montano is injured and Cassio is drunk. Neither of them serve as unbiased witnesses. The only person who can is Iago. Consequently, Othello asks him for a testimony. "Honest Iago," he says, "speak, who began this? On thy love I charge thee." So after a bit of posturing, Iago implicates Cassio as the responsible party. What makes Iago so clever here is that he's set up this entire scene, and in the scene he positions himself as the arbiter of truth. Othello has to depend on his word. What Iago says here constitutes legal proof to Othello, who is both judge and jury, and this has real consequences on the judgment. It entrenches Iago's position as somebody who knows what is going on. And obviously, that's important for the scenes that follow. Additionally, it's good to note here that this is the second night in a row that Othello and Desdemona have been pulled from their bedroom. In Act 1, they were called at the Duke's request, and now in Act 2, they've been called out onto the street to break up a fight. Lots of people have lots of opinions on whether or not they ever actually have a moment together. The question being whether or not they actually ever have a chance to be intimate with each other. Also interesting. After Othello makes his decision that Cassio will never more be officer of mine and that he will help Montano recover from his injury, he tells Iago to look with care about the town and to silence those whom this vile brawl distracted. He tells Iago to go control the narrative, to spin the story and calm everybody down. So everybody seems to know the ancient skill set, and yet nobody is safe from him. Instead of going about town right away, Iago stays to comfort Cassio, who laments the loss of his reputation, and even links his reputation to his immortal soul. He seems to think that if he loses reputation on earth, he'll lose his spot in heaven in the afterlife. That's a dubious theological claim, but he's drunk, so I guess we'll forgive him that. It is telling, though, that he makes this connection, that he believes his reputation on earth matters in some sort of cosmic way. It's similar to how Othello later on will link the loss of Desdemona to chaos and a descent into hell. Cassio has lost his position as lieutenant, a signifier of status and virtue within the logic that has guided his life so far. Similarly, Othello believes that losing Desdemona would be tantamount to losing his status in Venice. When the characters invest their identity in status symbols, they risk losing their identity when they lose those status symbols. The loss of reputation is the loss of oneself, and for Cassio, the loss of salvation. Because Cassio is desperate to get his position and identity back, Iago can leverage his fallen position further. He calls Cassio a good lieutenant, and cleverly says, "I think you think I love you," before giving him some advice. He says our general's wife is now the general, and suggests that he asks her to speak to Othello on his behalf. It's good advice. Pray to a saint to intervene on your behalf to God. I mean, people do this all the time. Iago finishes this act with yet another soliloquy, another opportunity to confide in us, the audience. He uses the opportunity to playfully compare himself to the devil, and he tells us exactly what he's going to do. He's going to use Desdemona's best impulses, her goodness, her compulsion to protect people, against her. She will try to help Cassio, and he will, out of her own goodness, make the net that shall enmesh them all. It's bone-chilling how good he is at this. We'll see how his plan plays out in Act 3, which we'll go over in detail next time. To be notified when that video comes out in a couple days, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.